You're listening to If Only I Were Wiser podcast, where Raina Wilson brings together wisdom and raw life stories to provide encouragement and truth. So many times it's easy to become discouraged in your own pursuit of health because your story or circumstances look drastically different from your favorite influencer or even the expectations you had for yourself. If that is you, welcome! This space is for you to learn, breathe, and maybe just listen and see what wellness could look like for you. Hey friends, welcome back to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast. On today's episode, I have the founder of Homegrown Education, Liz Haselmayer. Liz believes the best way to nourish the body is through simple, nutrient-dense foods. After spending over a decade undernourished, Liz has made it her mission to spread the message of food freedom through accurate food education. This was such a sweet and enlightening conversation to have with Liz as she paints the picture about giving your family the tools to create nourishing and healthy habits. That means covering things like the raw dairy conversation and glyphosate and pesticides and everything in between. So let's dive in. Hello, Liz. Welcome to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really kind of fangirling right now because I've followed you guys for so long. So it's really just an honor to have this conversation.
Oh, that's hilarious. I thank you. I'm honored to be here and I'm excited to dive in. Reading the outline, I was getting super excited about everything we're going to cover. So happy to be here.
Yeah, I would love just to start off by hearing what does a day in the life look like for you?
Ooh, that's a good one. And honestly, it's kind of a sore subject right now. So I'm glad you're asking because it's forcing me to face reality a little bit.
Yeah.
Day in the life is, first of all, totally depends on which day of the week you pick because they're just all so different. But I'll give you a synopsis, right? So I try to wake up before my kids. 6:30 is prime between 6 o'clock and 6:30. I don't know how granular you want me to go, by the way. But
no, go for it.
I just feel like it's important when you're a mom and you're like, okay, what does your day actually look like? So I try to wake up between 6 and 6:30, go downstairs. Today, I literally had to clean my kitchen for 45 minutes. It was such a disaster, which is, again, just a reality of it. So hopefully that's not my everyday routine, but just kind of get the morning going. I always try to eat within 30 minutes of waking up, usually a protein, carb, and fat kind of rich, hitting all my macros in my meal. And then I make amazing coffee and I drink that. And usually I, if I can, kind of hang out and have some conversations with my husband before he has to leave and go to work. And then my kids wake up and they kind of stumble down the stairs one by one. And yeah, from there, it's kind of what does the day hold for us? Some days of the week I'm taking them to an enrichment class, which is great. Some days of the week we're just home and maybe we have to run to the store or something, but we try to squeeze in some just regular routines in our afternoon, but we don't necessarily have it time blocked out, so we'll do some schoolwork with the kids. We'll do obviously lots of meal prepping and cleaning up the kitchen. And then we'll kind of leave our days to hang out. Yesterday, one of my daughters had read a really old book and she wanted to watch the movie that the book was based off of, which is so odd because
how fun.
Usually movies are based off of books, but this one was reversed and it was an old Shirley Temple film. And so she made popcorn, we made pot of tea, we sat around, we watched this old black and white film, and that was our afternoon, And so we're getting near the end of our school year. I do try to hit 20 minutes of reading and 20 minutes of math with my youngest school-age daughter, just because that consistency in those early years is really important. But the rest of it is, do I have packages to fulfill? We just launched another company, so I've got a lot kind of going on there, which feels, we're in all the growing pains of that. And so it's right now, to be honest, it feels a little chaotic. And I think I texted my sister-in-law yesterday, some days I want to just bang my head against the wall a little bit in frustration. I just need a moment of peace. And I think that is what I'm striving for, but I certainly haven't reached that equilibrium, but we're working really hard. And I think it's important to say, there are seasons of your life where that's just reality and you can't escape it, unfortunately, but that's kind of where I'm sitting right now.
I can totally empathize. My husband just finished like a ridiculous training schedule where he was like in and out and in and out. So my son will be 2 this weekend, and it's been such like just the flux of things and managing expectations and the grief and trying to manage all the emotions that come with like everything changing all the time. So I can empathize with that.
Yes.
But yeah, definitely that's been like a common prayer for these past like couple weeks has been, Lord, like help me start the day with peace because if not, I will not be able to get through this day.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the cool things that's kind of happened in the last year or two is that before Joey leaves, my husband, he always prays over me, like out loud in front of our kids and like physically puts his hands on me. And anytime I'm like working on my computer, I make sure like I shut that off and I just like sit in that moment. And he kind of prays that same prayer, like, you know, pray for peace and like a really blessed time with the kids and you know wisdom in our businesses and things like that. And I feel like even that is just like a really nice practice, and I do feel like it kind of welcomes a different posture in my head, like, hey, he's kind of speaking this out loud. You know, we're asking for like supernatural assistance in our day, and so that's been a really tiny thing that's been really helpful. So I feel that
Yeah,
rush. Yeah.
definitely. And that's like, I think just such a practical way to like embed a healthy spiritual rhythm, you know, even if people are not walking into like a faith foundation, asking for peace and asking for patience and asking for gentleness, like all those fruits of the spirit just to start your day, I think, especially with your kids. Otherwise, I'm not exuding those fruits of the spirit on my own accord. So I would love to just get started with I would love to hear the foundation to homegrown education and what that kind of started for you guys.
Yeah, it's such a funny story now that we're like 2.5 years, maybe 3 years. No, 2 years. I'm bad at math. We're only 2 years in this thing, which is crazy, but it all kind of started, and I feel like I've told this story a million times, but it's just reality, right? Like we decided when our oldest was going into first grade, we would homeschool her. And honestly, not for the conventional reasons. Like, truthfully, we live in a fantastic school system. We had just bought this house in the school system that I grew up going in. Like, I thought we would be public school parents through and through. But I entered the marriage with a 4-year-old daughter with her. And so we had, my husband and I had just gotten married. I was pregnant with our second daughter. So now, you know, and then we had just bought a house. So there was a lot of family transition happening.
Yeah.
And, you know, she did go to kindergarten, which ours was only half day for our public school. And that was fine. But for me, I was like, I think I need some time at home with her to establish family identity, because her family identity has shifted quite a bit for in amazing ways. Like, nothing negative about it, but just I wasn't ready to send off this kind of really transformative 6 or 7 year old girl and say, okay, like, so much is happening back at home, but go spend your 6 hours a day at school. And so we decided to homeschool her. And so through that journey, when she actually hit the second grade, I decided to I wanted to teach her something about food. I loved food. I loved talking about it. I myself dealt with a terrible relationship with food. And so I was like, well, let's kind of try to avoid that by taking the opposite approach and build some more context into what we were eating and why. And I was kind of like new on my real food journey. And so I wanted to incorporate a lot of the things that I had learned over the last maybe 3 years at that time, and stuff that I found really transformational about how I viewed nourishment. And when I went to, you know, buy some curriculum or download some worksheets, there was just nothing on the market that spoke to food the way I believed they should, or how we were viewing food. And so I was like, well, maybe I'll try to craft something for her, you know, little worksheet. I even have like a text to one of my best friends that I was like, I feel like I just had an epiphany. I want to create something that's really beautiful and engaging for kids, but also teaches them about real food. And she was like, great, yeah, go for it. Then, that's awesome. And I was like, okay, I will. And so I wrote the first workbook over 2 years. And along that time, had a lot of great kind of guidance and just help in various ways from a lot of different people, reaching out to different sort of like practitioners and editors and all kinds of people asking for their input in the book. And then we launched that very first one in April 2021. So it's only been 2 years. And since then we've put out, I think, 5 other resources and started our own podcast. And we've got some other fun things like in the pipeline. So that's really the creation. Like we just needed something for our own family. And so I had no idea. Like, I didn't know if anyone else needed anything or if I was the only mom that was like, oh, food's so interesting. What a fun lens to learn through,
Right.
And it turned out that a lot of other families were really excited to have a resource like that. So this simple little book really changed our lives in a number of ways.
Yeah. And I think it just like speaks volumes to like the Holy Spirit laying these things on our hearts and like giving you the dream and the passion to like be able to create that, not realizing, there's a need elsewhere,
Yeah, totally.
So what did it look like for you? Like you mentioned, navigating that season with your daughter of saying, here's what conventional food, the food pyramid looks like, but this is not where we align. So what was that process like to come to terms with realizing that what is being taught in our culture, especially for younger kids in terms of nutrition, does not align with like a holistic, just whole food focus?
Totally. So the very first lesson in the workbook is called Forgetting the Pyramid, because I was like, let's just start out with a clean slate.
Yeah.
Like, the very first lines are like, listen, the USDA, and this is like very specific to the United States. I know other countries have different food guidelines, but I base it off of where we live. And so I was like, the USDA has been publishing dietary guidelines for decades. And, if you want to look at even the history of how those have evolved to kind of show how the trends, the rise and fall of certain trends, you can. But for this workbook and really how I frame the larger conversation, we're going to look just at food through some really simple food groups. So we're going to look at animal products, and that includes, muscle meat like everyone is used to eating, but also the other parts of the animal, like the bone, skin, connective tissue, and organs. Like, we're going to talk about the utilization of all of those pieces. We're going to talk, and then you add in milk and eggs and other byproduct and animal fats and things like that. So that's its whole section. And then you add in, we're going to talk about fruits and vegetables, and we're going to talk about, which always is like the focus, right? Like, kids, eat your vegetables, eat your fruit,
Sure.
Eat the rainbow. And, I'm totally into veggies. I think that that's legit, but I think eating the rainbow could encapsulate way more than just your produce, right? I think you could throw in various other colored forms of real food that could fit in nicely. So fruits and veggies are in there. And within that, again, I wanted to not just talk about, hey, eat your vegetables. And I know sometimes they don't taste great, but just eat them anyways, like eat the dang salad kind of culture. And for me, I was more like, hey, let's talk about like what grows in what season for your various part of the country. And let's talk about the different ways of farming. And what does conventional farming look like, and what does organic farming look like, and even those subsets of either of those, like what are these like broader complexities of the agricultural system? Because if you look at any other curriculum, they're just talking about the very end byproduct, and they're not talking at all about how that food gets to your store or on your plate. And so that's one of the big distinguishing things I wanted to cover. And then for grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds, this one was huge for me because I was like, listen, we've been doing sourdough, we've been soaking grains, we've been doing all kinds of these things. And again, that's not found in other educational resources for kids or adults, truthfully. So I really wanted to give some context there and say, hey, what is it about wheat that can sometimes be problematic? And what are these so-called anti-nutrients that we can find, and how can we neutralize them, right? So it's all written in, kind of plain language. It's really geared for the 3rd through 6th grade students. So it's definitely not an early elementary workbook. And we actually came out with an early elementary workbook about a year later. But yeah, I wanted to cover that. And then the final sort of food group is fats and oils. And that's another big one, right? Where we define, what does a, nourishing fat look like, and where do you get it, and how do you source it, and, lard and tallow and coconut oil and olive oil and all of these fats and oils that would have been available to us before we started mass manufacturing highly refined seed oils, which I know seed oils is almost kind of a trendy term. I don't even like using it anymore, but it truthfully does.
Right.
It does define like what the oil is from. You're extracting this oil from the seeds of corn, cotton, canola, safflower, sunflower, etc. And so we break that open a little bit, and not from a fear-based lens, and we don't go deep into like the saturated fat or cholesterol conversation. We do some definitions, but I just wanted to show these kids like, hey, this is what really amazing food looks like. And then the very last part of the book is real food for real life, and we just share some stories of some ranchers, a beekeeper, an organic farm, and that's kind of it's all wrapped up in 27 lessons, but that's also kind of like how we've talked about it in our house, and our kids see it, and everyone's kids see it. It's not like you need to go buy a curriculum to talk to your kids about food. Like, talk to them at your grocery store,
right,
your farmer's market, when you're in the kitchen cooking. I know it's like one extra thing, right, to think about, but for me it was so foundational, and I felt like I could have avoided a lot of my bad relationship with food had I had better context. And so it's been a big piece of how we are parenting our girl. And we have 3 daughters too. So it's been a big piece of that. So.
Yeah. And I feel like, at least for me personally, that even those like elementary level resources are pivotal, because I went through, an academic nutrition course to become a certified nutritionist. And I remember sitting with my husband and looking at my curriculum and being like, I don't resonate with any of this, which was really hard because I was also going through pre and postnatal training and nutrition as well, which was just where I was in that life stage, to be able to help other people. And I just remember looking at him and showing him like what I was learning, and I had to go through this like deconstructive almost like process, because what I was learning to be able to pass my test did not align whatsoever with what we were teaching in our home, much less what I would encourage others towards how to fuel their body. So that has just been definitely interesting. And I'm even reading Kate Deering's book like right now, and last night's unit was on grains. And it's crazy because I don't think without the information that I've done personal research through creators like yourself, and other people that are having the whole food conversation, I would have been stuck with the food pyramid is the way towards holistic nutrition, and it really isn't. So I know this might be a broader conversation, but I would love to dive into it or just see where we can go with it. But why do you think it's so difficult to have access or to start making this transition towards holistic nutrition in a world or culture that pushes conventional food?
I think the number one thing is consumer confusion. I just think in general, we don't know what real food is anymore, and we don't know how to source it, or we don't even know how to prepare it in our homes. And I'm not talking about any one person specifically. I'm saying as a society, we don't know. We're very confused.
Right.
And so there's multiple things that are going on here. We've seen this great outsourcing of life skills. Let's just say over the last 100 years, but I'm sure it's been more than that. And so we've outsourced our food production. We've outsourced our cooking. We've outsourced our, honestly, those are the two main things, but within those, there's a million little subcategories, right? Like we can just go to the freezer section to buy pre-chopped onions. You don't even have to know how to chop an onion. You don't have to have basic knife skills anymore. You can, and that's if you want to start with the chopped onion, you can just buy the whole prepackaged meal and be good to go. And so it's like we've outsourced a lot of our food preparation and production. And we, in that time, and I think the main reason why we've done that is because we've been sold this lie that preparing food is not worth your time or energy, and that you could be doing other things that are more productive. You know, you could be working an hour later at your corporate job and making extra money. And so it doesn't make sense for you to rush home after a stressful commute and traffic and then try to prepare dinner, because then you're going to be stressed out and your kids are not going to benefit. That's a conversation like people are having. And I also think, you know, within that, I just think in general, we've somehow mustered up this immense trust that if something is sold in a grocery store, it's safe for my consumption. And we have this obsession with like the expert, right? And this might get a little broad, but I just think in general, we tend to believe that, well, we have regulatory agencies in place and they're keeping an eye and tabs on every little ounce of food production, and it would never be sold in a grocery store if it had any negative impact on my health. And it's the very first thing I want people to drop your assumption that if it's sold in the store, it's safe for you. And that can be applied to food, that can be applied to pharmaceuticals, that can be applied to personal care products, that can be applied to household products, like anything. And so that's the transformation I know personally I had to go through. I had to say, wait a minute, I'm not producing any of my own food. I'm literally buying the instant rice packet, and I wasn't microwaving it, but I was heating it up on the stove. And then I would, you know, cook alongside of it, maybe a piece of hunted venison. So it was a very odd juxtaposition of like, okay, my husband went out in the woods and shot this deer, and yes, we did butcher it, but then we're combining it with, you know, this packaged rice, which the packaged rice in and of itself is not the larger issue. It's just the fact that I didn't even for 1 second consider what I was bringing to the table. What was I producing? How was I providing? And within that, I had to learn a lot of the skills. And when you learn them, you realize like, gosh, they're so simple. Like they're not hard. It's not hard to ferment vegetables or make sauerkraut. It's not hard to make sourdough. I mean, maybe it is in the beginning when it's intimidating, but we have so much access to information in this day and age. And, you know, a great quote I heard on one of our shows from a guy named Brian Sanders is like, listen, people just have the wrong information when it comes to their food. It's not hard to make changes about your food, but they have the wrong information. So again, it goes back to that consumer confusion. It goes back to the fact that we as a society have honestly downplayed the importance of food. We tend to, even just like saying food is medicine, I think we're so obsessed with technological advance that food as medicine seems too simple. And it's like, no. That patent pharmaceutical is medicine.
Sure.
Food is just food, you know? Right. And so we've got all these kind of things going on, this culture that's obsessed with entertainment and technology and making maybe monetary gains over health or physical gains. And then, you know, a lot of us, if you bring it down to the practical level, as mothers and fathers or individuals living on their own, like it comes down to finances. Like it's, you're like, how do I financially do this? And it comes down to a knowledge gap of how do I functionally cook this? Like, I can't tell you how many people have been like, I cooked my first whole chicken because of you, Liz. Like I didn't know how to cook a chicken. And I'm just like, that's amazing. Yeah. But it's so simple. You know, you literally put it in the pan and you bake it. So it's multi-pronged, but I think that we can't overlook the impact that all of those tiny shifts have made. And I think it's why we see what we're seeing today, where people are completely frustrated by their food choices and they don't necessarily know how to change.
Mm. Mm-hmm. And I think before we dive into, I think, food specific um, transitions, I would love to hear just what 3 skills, like you said, cooking a chicken. I was definitely one of the first people that like learned how to cook a chicken. And I think I was watching, I think Shauna Holman put it in the Instapot. And I was like, well,
Mm-hmm.
guess what? Now I can like make bone broth and do all these things.
Mm-hmm.
And then I shared with my community. And I think my mom texted me and was like, oh my gosh, how do you do this? Because it's not something like generationally. We didn't have the tools or resources or, like you said, time because of the way that culture is socially constructed to push the hurry over like
Mm-hmm.
intentional time as a family. That would be a whole other topic. But
Yeah.
um, if you could pick like 3 things, 3 skills, 3 habits to start implementing right now, where would you encourage people to start?
That's a great question. I think one is going to be less of a habit and more of understanding which fats to incorporate in your house. For me, I think fats are so important because there's a lot of mixed messaging around them. And I think, number one, ditching any kind of ultra refined oil was pivotal in our health experience. And so, even though at one point in time I was buying organic canola oil, uh, I eventually came to realize, like, listen, it's not just the fact that it's organic. Like, it's fine that it's not. Maybe it's lacking a GMO, or maybe it's grown organically, but it's the actual nutritional makeup of this fat that causes issues, and especially when I heat it. Right? It's highly unstable. It oxidizes quickly. It requires a lot of chemical solvents, deodorizers, bleachers, just to get into the bottle and sit on the shelf of the store. And so I realized, like, at the end of the day, is this a naturally occurring, nutrient dense version of a cooking oil? And I was like, no, it's not. And especially when the counterpart is so readily available. I can buy coconut oil. It's
Mm-hmm.
just on the other side of the aisle. Like, I just literally have to turn 180 degrees and I'm good.
Yeah.
And so switching from canola oil, or it just a general name of vegetable oil, and or any kind of iteration of that, I ditched that and I looked for like single source. I call them fruit oils because they're fruits, right?
Mm-hmm.
An avocado, a coconut. Um, those are fruits. And so I switched to those. So now we cook with coconut oil, avocado oil, butter, sometimes ghee. And then if we have rendered tallow or lard, we'll cook with that. Oftentimes that's just left over from the cooking process that we save. And we also save our bacon fat. So
Mm-hmm.
switching my fats was big. And I think that's helpful, and it tends to be kind of the biggest source of the inflammatory foods if we're talking about everyday consumption. The other thing is, whatever your family enjoys eating the most, think of ways to make it more nutritious and nutrient dense. So you don't have to necessarily completely ditch every nostalgic food you grew up on, or never eat bread or carbs again. um, I would say think about the foods you enjoy eating and how can you kind of level them up? How can you upgrade them? And for us, one simple thing, and one thing I loved diving into, was sourdough. And I learned how to make a starter from scratch. I've made several starters from scratch. And then I failed my way through baking the first probably 30 loaves
Mm-hmm.
before I stumbled upon a recipe I thought was actually useful. And then from there, I've just continued to incorporate it in not just big, crusty artisan loaves of bread, but like sandwich bread and English muffins and tortillas. And how can I use my sourdough starter to even like ferment granola that I make at home, and all kinds of stuff. Like, there's so many applications. But if you're not a family that's eating bread every day, my goodness, don't go through the stress and buy all the
Yeah.
materials of sourdough, because it is a little bit of a commitment. Think about something else that you're utilizing. And then, a really simple thing that I love and I think can really take the place of any probiotic pill ever is just fermenting some cabbage. You can call it
Mm.
sauerkraut, you can call it fermented cabbage, you can call it whatever you want, but it's literally just chopped up cabbage, a salt brine, and a weight, a fermentation weight. You don't need a special jar. You don't need a ton of equipment. And for us, it's adding in that extra probiotic rich food, that live culture food. That's really, really helpful. Especially for those who, might not have access to the other live culture foods, right? Are you able to, I don't personally make kombucha at home, but do you have access to some good stuff? It can be a little heavier on the yeasty side, so that's more like a bread fermentation, but even raw dairy is a big topic, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people don't have access, right? And so if we're going to talk about quality gut health, the cheapest thing you can do is make some sauerkraut. So yeah, there's a great resource, and the website's literally just cultured.guru. It's a friend of mine. Her name's Caitlin, and she gives tons of free fermenting information. I mean, you don't have to pay to get this stuff. It's readily available at your fingertips. So I think I hit 3, but the other one you mentioned was the bone broth, or like a meat stock. And I think that, again, when I kind of lean into gut health because I know that my gut health was compromised. I know that my kids' gut health was compromised for a time. And so that's such a simple way to enhance your healing, is just making a simple broth. And it's as easy as almost easy as boiling pasta, honestly. If you think about the actual process, you just
Oh,
leave it
for
in the
sure.
pot a little bit longer. So those are my main things, but I think it comes down to, like, what are you actually going to feed your family? Because if you're not making anything from scratch right now, and I go tell you to make some sourdough starter, that doesn't feel like a reasonable jump from A to B. Start focusing on, hey, let's just start making some things from scratch. And what does that
Mm-hmm.
look like? And how can I source the raw material versus maybe buying something that's prepackaged? Even when it comes to people's seasonings, you'd be surprised how many people are still buying taco seasoning. And I'm like, you have all the spices in your pantry. It's so simple. You don't need to buy pre-made taco seasoning. So just peeling back, kind of recognizing where you are in the journey, and then taking those baby steps, because it's a long path ahead, and you don't want to jump from A to Z too quickly.
Oh, for sure. And I think social media makes that so easy because you see creators, influencers, people that have been, curating their health journey for so long. And me to be able to step into that space and be like, oh, yeah, I'll just implement all of these things at once, which lead to a other whole slew of health issues when
Yeah.
you're starting to go from 0 to 100. But for our family, it literally looked like, okay, we love pizza and we love mac and cheese.
Yes.
I looked up, okay, how to make pizza dough. And it wasn't from a sourdough starter, but I was like, okay, then this is how we start. We're going to pick, that will be our fun activity for the day. Like, we're going to go to the grocery store, we'll pick our veggies and toppings, and we'll start with pizza. And then mac and cheese, it was the same thing. It was, okay, like, I'm not going to buy Kraft off the shelf for $1. I am going to go pick the cheeses that I want. I'm going to grab the heavy cream. And then slowly from that, I think that also lends towards food freedom because people are understanding the low calorie store-bought things are not always healthy. Like, it doesn't translate. Low calorie,
Mm-hmm.
low fat does not translate to healthy, which is a whole, like I said, other conversation. But it's definitely interesting to see a progression. And like you said, it's a super helpful encouragement to know that you don't have to start at point Z, because you're going to
Mm-hmm.
walk in with a lot of overwhelm and just be super stressy and depressy just trying to figure this out if you're going all in at once.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I couldn't agree more.
So you mentioned raw dairy, and maybe this is one of those things, but if you could pick 3 more things to add to your diet, like you said, you've mentioned a few, but what are some of these topics or food groups that are foundational to your family and you would recommend that everybody get started in?
Totally. Raw dairy is up there, and I think dairy is so often misunderstood. And it's one of my favorite topics to talk about because it was the first time I realized the impact of food industry and food regulation dictating, or I would say overriding common sense nutrition, to be honest. And so what I mean by that is there's a long kind of harried story about how we got to where we came to be. And I think if you want to understand pasteurization or raw dairy, you have to look at the time period in which things were unfolding, and the actual man who is, coined for the term, named Louis Pasteur, where this is his last name. And so I did a really deep dive into him and his history, and he kind of got his first kind of successes in the French wine industry, pasteurizing French wine, and then later they abandoned that because it didn't result in the best high quality wine anymore, and actually changed and altered key components of the wine, which I think is so ironic, because that's how I feel he impacted the dairy industry. But I think if people understood more of the history behind there, and I could talk for hours, so I'll spare you that info, but even the fact that between the time period where folks in the cities were getting very sick from like raw milk, that's not a fib or an untrue story, that is accurate. But between that time and the time where the FDA finally mandated all milk sold in US retailers in all the states had to be pasteurized was about 100 years. So this wasn't a, quick moving, we all of a sudden stumbled upon the discovery that milk we had been consuming for centuries, millennia, whatever timestamp you want to put on that, was all of a sudden harmful to human health. This was a result of a vast cultural and societal shift into the cities, and we didn't understand the way that health of the animal impacted the health of the animal byproduct, and we also didn't understand microbes, truthfully. And I think if Louis Pasteur were alive today and understood that we had beneficial microbes, he would be very confused, and he might change his stance. And so dairy is widely misunderstood because, in my opinion, the way that we're consuming it in mass in the United States is highly processed and highly refined. We're not only not as clued in to potential health of the animal. I mean, I know that dairy operators of all kinds care about the health of their cow. Why wouldn't they? That's where their business is rooted in. But I also know that we have conveniences and we have certain measures where we can pack a lot of cows into a small area. And this goes for even organic. I remember we had Mr. Will Harris on our podcast, and we asked him, what does the term organic mean to you? And he said, truthfully, it's losing its salt or its flavor, because one of the worst animal welfare examples I've ever stepped foot on was an organic dairy. And I was like, wow, I would love to kind of unpack that a little bit more. But now that we are kind of mass producing our dairy to be more widely accessible and affordable, which again has its benefits, we have to do a lot to it so that it's not the same product that we would have consumed 100 or 200 years ago. So the pasteurization, the homogenization, the vitamin fortification, the any kind of additive, a lot of times there's extra sugars in there. It's just completely different from whole raw dairy. And our family switched to whole raw dairy, I think 7-ish years ago, and we've never looked back. And so that's a huge thing for us. And we live in a state where you can't just go to a store and buy it off the shelf. You have to be part of a herd share or a private membership association. And so there's some really great resources to find a local raw milk provider. But beyond that, like, we drink the raw milk, but we also have raw milk yogurt. We have access to raw milk kefir. We get the cream. We can make butter with the cream. I mean, you can do all kinds of things. So again, it's kind of like the fats, right? It's like we weren't going to cut out fat in our diet. We were going to switch the source and the quality of it. So raw dairy was huge. Making sure, just in general, for our family and for us, like, we're getting enough protein is big. I think protein, often people don't realize how little they're consuming. Is they're under consuming it so often.
Yes.
And I've been doing sort of a personal experiment on myself, wearing a continuous glucose monitor. And so I've really seen the effects of kind of what I've eaten and how it affects my blood sugar. And so protein plays a huge role in that, just in the satiating factor, and also making sure like I can't get enough volume of food in my mouth without protein to last me throughout the day. Otherwise, I would be relying on carbohydrates for my whole satiation, and that doesn't serve my body well. So, yeah, the raw milk, the protein, I feel like we're getting to all of the food groups. But for us, it just kind of comes down to, what does our family enjoy eating? What is affordable for us in the time? We buy seasonal mostly just because it's more affordable to buy seasonal. And I don't have these hard rules about I can only buy like 100% organic. I actually don't hold that belief. I think that there are plenty of reasons why you would want to buy organic and support organic agriculture. But I also believe that pesticide residues are existent on both organic and conventional produce. So that's not necessarily the driving motivation
Yeah.
that should lead you to pay for that. So, I think your tap water is of greater concern when you're talking about toxicants and its effect on our biology. But so yeah, it's very when you're sort of identifying what I call like a family food value, it's really important you tailor it to what actually is practical for you and the foods that you enjoy eating and that you have access to. So
Yeah. And I don't think we can have this conversation without the financial component of that, because I've had that conversation with friends of not having access to raw dairy or not being in the space to pay $10 and more for a gallon of milk that week if it means we're not going to be able to also get A, B, and C just so that we have enough food for the week. So where do you think that plays a role in this conversation as well?
Yeah, and our raw milk is like $12 a gallon, and even that is like considered cheap compared to a lot of other people, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
For me, the biggest help, and this is something that still every week demands attention. It's not like you nail your grocery budget once and you're good to go, because prices are always changing and distribution's always changing, supply chains are always changing. But for me, I would much rather spend $7, $8, $9 even on a carton of eggs than $3.50 on a box of crackers, because that egg is going to last us way longer. It's going to be way more satiating. Even for my kids who won't eat necessarily like a scrambled egg, they will eat like they won't really knowingly eat it, but I will stir in egg whites into their oatmeal or add the egg yolk into our milkshake, or I'll sneak it in, right? So I'd much rather, like, I look at nutrient value and monetary value. I'm not just looking at the price tag, because I could go buy a bunch of cheap food. We'd eat through it in a day, and it still wouldn't serve our family well. So we kind of just not proportioned, but we just I'm trying to think of the word and I'm blanking on it. Allocated. There's the word. We reallocated our funds to the foods that give us the most bang for our buck. And I think this is, again, like where the conversation comes in. And I've been thinking a lot about organic, and especially as it relates to produce, because I think it has a completely different meaning in animal agriculture. But if I was looking at a family and saying, like, to be healthy, you have to only buy the organic produce at the store. And so then for them, they make the decision to not buy any fresh produce at all. And then they maybe go spend those dollars on a different section of the grocery store. That would make me sad. And that would bum me out, because I wouldn't be giving them the full picture. So I think for my family, I want to focus on doing the best I can with what I have. I want to focus on getting high quality animal byproducts, because for me, that's involving just an extra layer of potential environmental impact. And also just, I think it's really important that when an animal is giving its life for our nourishment, that we're doing the best we can by that animal. So I tend to throw more money at my meat, my eggs, my dairy, things like that. And then I also think shifting away from some of the like really traditional family foods. Like we don't buy goldfish, we don't buy cereal, we don't buy granola bars,
Yeah.
we don't buy there's a number of things. Like we probably have like 25 staple items in our whole house at all times. Like that's it. Which might sound like a lot, but truthfully, like that's involving like spices and oils too, and canned goods. So we really simplified kind of what we buy. And then I throw more kind of money and attention to animal byproduct and grains as well, because I want, if I'm going to consume grains, I want my grains to be of high quality. And then the rest we filter in what we can do.
Yeah, definitely. It's so funny because my son's definitely in the snacking stage of toddlerhood. And it's so interesting to see, I think, the transition from the foundation that my husband and I grew up with. We were walking through the commissary the other day and we went down, the Jello, powdered, like Nesquik and all of the like other half to the baking aisle, and we just kind of laughed because I was like, oh well, there's all of the 90s that we grew up with, and he was like, yeah, those are spaghetti marshmallows. And we just like looked at each other and we're like, that is so crazy, because it's so different from our son learning to like make marshmallows with gelatin and vanilla. Or his favorite snack right now is he could eat his weight in berries, and we have like grass-fed beef sticks. So I love what you said about being able to prioritize protein, because that was definitely a hill that I will die on, especially for female nutrition. But it just like helps prioritize, like you said, like if you are caring about holistic nourishment and you want to be intentional about where your dollar is going, you can physically see where your dollar is going in your nutrient profile. So that's just such a great way to like audit your grocery budget and see like, okay, like, am I spending $50 on snacks that will inhale and over the course like of our holistic nutrition won't provide anything, versus spending 50 to 60% of our grocery budget on our meats and quality grains and produce, where I know for a fact that that's going to nourish our bodies better. So I would I'm super curious about, in the midst of just some of these big conversations and all of your own personal research, what is something that has been shocking to learn and then encouraging and exciting?
Oh, what has been shocking to learn? I think for me, I'll go off of the two most recent kind of things I've been diving into. I think blood sugar regulation is a big topic for me right now, because I had never considered my blood sugar. And I am a very kind of data driven person. And so I listened to a podcast probably a year ago with two really great real food dietitians, and they were talking about their continuous glucose monitors. And then I read a book on it, and I'd actually purchased the CGM, like almost 9 months prior, and just didn't have the guts to put it on. I was anxious about it. And so watching over the last month how easily and readily available glucose laden foods were in my house, and I was just in a habitual state of snacking on them, and how much my blood glucose would spike. And the rate, like, and just to clarify for those who, like me, I didn't know anything, your blood glucose rises and falls all day long based on when you eat, and it's a good thing, right? Like, we eat glucose for energy. It's in anything that is sweet, meaning sugary, or starchy, meaning grains or certain types of vegetables. And so any carbohydrate we're consuming is then giving our body a certain level of glucose, and there's other elements there too, but our body and every single cell in your body uses glucose. Your eyes use glucose, your liver cells, everything. And so for us to fuel our bodies, we consume this. Your body can also make it if it needs to, if you're eating such low levels of carbohydrates. But
Mm-hmm.
what happens is that we live in a society that has an overabundance of glucose at every turn. We've got added sugars and everything. We've got really starchy foods. We've actually refined out a lot of the fibrous components of our grains, which means that we're consuming like the most potent starches that we would have ever consumed in human history.
Mm-hmm.
And so you look at the standard American diet, or even for me, a very nourished, like holistic diet, and you can still see. I remember one of the biggest shocks to me was my afternoon iced coffee with raw milk and literally a teaspoon of maple syrup. And for me and my body and my exercise level at that time, it spiked my glucose 60 points, which is about 30 points over
Oh,
the
wow.
desired kind of rise and fall. And so for me, I was like, wow, this treat that I thought was like, was pretty clean and healthy. And, I had my raw milk and I could, post a cute photo on Instagram, really didn't serve my body well
Mm-hmm.
because I was having a mismatched kind of fuel intake for the amount that I was demanding on my body. I think if I had had that iced coffee and then gone for a 3-mile jog, my body would have sopped up that extra fuel because your muscles would be using
Yeah.
that. And so that's kind of what I see. I saw myself walking around like that for a long time, of kind of like this mismatched energy. Like we're flooding our body with way more energy than we need. And so what happens is insulin gets released in the body. It shuttles glucose from our bloodstream into various storage, units. And it's either your liver, your muscles, or your fat cells. And so when we're continuously sort of like flooding our system with too much of these sugars, and even if they're from like a starchy vegetable like a potato or something, and it's not something you think of as sugar per se, you can still see that glucose spike. And so I realized I needed to be more careful about the way that I was eating my food. And the beautiful thing is there's so many things you can do. You can pair your foods, you can pair your carbohydrates
Mm-hmm.
with fat and protein. You can order your foods in a specific manner. You can drink some sort of acetic acid, usually in the form of apple cider vinegar. And all of this information is in a phenomenal book called Glucose Revolution. So anyone who's interested should go read that book for sure. But for me, the blood sugar piece was kind of both of those. It was very shocking for me to see how my body had responded, and also very encouraging to realize, hey, this is a very correctable daily habitual thing I can take on. I don't have to cut out carbs. I don't have to go low carb, but I can be more responsible with my
Right.
energy intake. And I just think most people are walking around with zero recognition or information on the way that their body is processing the amount of energy specifically, because we're you can either get energy from carbohydrates or from fats. And so we've got a
Right.
mismatch. Sometimes we're too high in fat, sometimes we're too high in carbs, sometimes we're too high in fats and carbs. And for me, it was definitely a bit of a mismatch. And so I have kind of fine-tuned that process, and I feel like I'm getting into good rhythms of fueling my body still with whole nourishing foods like beautiful sourdough and other organic grains. And I don't have fear around it, but I have intel, and I think that the
Mm-hmm.
information is really helpful.
Yeah, that's super empowering. And even just giving people the opportunity, like you said, to have resources for them to be able to dive in whenever they feel ready. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely, I think Corey Malloy said it, of like being able to see the process at which you are able to intake and process and implement information shows where you are in your healing journey. So being able to
Mm-hmm.
step back and just like really evaluate, like, is this good for my heart? Is this good for my soul? Is this good for my body right now? No, that's okay. Like, there will be a season where I can implement some of these things and make these changes. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Totally. Yeah, and I want to piggyback off what you just said and be really clear that I don't think everyone should run out and go get a continuous glucose monitor.
Yeah.
I would say I was like a very nourished, healthy. I exercised on a regular basis, female, and I the reason I chose to get that extra intel is because, I plan on doing several podcasts on it and writing some resources. And so it was like very much research based for me.
Yeah.
But I don't think that people should run out and grab that as their first step. If you've been in the real food game for a long time and you have any suspicion that glucose regulation is of concern, I think it's a beautiful tool, but it is by no means the number one, stepping stone. And so it's a great continuous like gut check to say like, am I ready for that information? Am I ready to take that on? Am I ready to implement the things? If I'm getting the information and I'm not implementing it, why am I even reading this yet? So I just think that's an important note to say, like, this is not my broadcast that everyone should go slap a CGM on their arm. I actually think the opposite of that. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. Where can our community connect with you? All the things Homegrown Education.
Yeah. So we're on Instagram at homegrown_education. We're sharing, regular posts there and stories. We have a podcast called the Homegrown Podcast. You can listen anywhere podcasts are available. And homegrowneducation.org is our main website where we're selling our children's nutrition curriculum and early elementary workbooks and, regenerative farm coloring books. And we've also got a couple meal plans on there for dinner and breakfast, the two kind of bookends of your day. And so our whole goal is to just empower families to embrace real food. So we're going to keep churning out content, and those are all the places you can find it.
Yes, definitely. And I'll link all of that. But y'all, I love Liz and everything that her family is doing. Fully support, love their resources. They're absolutely beautiful. So I'm definitely excited to get my son's hands on those when he can hold, a pencil. But for our closing question, we close with this for all of our guests. So if you could provide any wisdom to your younger self or for our community that is listening, what would you share?
Ooh, that's good. I would say care about your nourishment. I went over a decade being undernourished and poorly nourished. And I just think in a culture that might be giving you 10 excuses as to why you've got too much going on and food is the last thing on your mind, and there's easy, cheap, convenient resources readily available at your fingertips, and to just embrace those. And again, like I said, outsource your nourishment. I would encourage you to reject that narrative as much as possible. And especially when you have the privilege of stewarding a young family and you have little kids. And as a mom who's walked both the very mainstream conventional route with kids and now today more intentional with my nourishment, I can tell you every single time it is worth the extra intention. It is worth staying up 30 minutes to read the book. It is worth consuming the podcast for your betterment and your encouragement. And it is worth embracing real food because it's truly the foundation to your kids' health and your health. And if you're like me and you want to hold your great grandkids and be really active and live a long, healthy life, it's the single best thing you can do on a daily basis because we have to feed ourselves every day. So it's a beautiful opportunity to embrace true nourishment. So
yes, that was perfect. Well, thank you, Liz, so much for your time. This has been such a good conversation, and I can't wait to just share all those resources. So thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you
so much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Thank you for listening, friend. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you don't want to miss any wisdom or encouragement, be sure to subscribe to the show. And don't forget to rate and review. Your feedback means so much and helps our community grow. If you're looking for more wellness wisdom and free resources, head over to livingwiselywell.com or get connected with me on Instagram at wiselywell. And if you're looking for a break from the hurried health lifestyle, check out my Return to Rest resource for tangible ways to slow down and finally find rest.